So here we go. So here's InDesign, right? You're seeing all the previews of lots of files that I've been opening up or not. So you make a new file, right? I'm going to make this 18 by 24 because that's the size that you're going to work with, right? So instead of it points, I'm going to go to inches and put, oh, look, magic, 18 by 24. Notice that here, when you set up the new file, it tells you how many pages you have. If you have facing pages, if you're working on a book, you want facing pages because you're working on a spread. If you're working posters, get rid of that because you go nuts trying to have overlaps if you do spreads and you don't want that. Start at page 1, you leave columns 1. I don't deal with columns here. I'll do it inside, right? And then you can have the margins here. So this is where you can set. The automatic setting in InDesign is 1/2 inch all around, right? Now, let's say that you want to work with the Fibonacci. So it's a 1 to 1 to 2 to 3 proportion. So let's say that you unlock it here so that you can control each one. So if the top is 1/2 inch, right, what's the left going to be? 1/2 inch, right, because it's 1 to 1. What's the right going to be? 1, right? 1 to 1 to 2. And what's the bottom going to be? 1.5, exactly, right? And the simple way to doing is that these two added together give you the right margin, and these two added together gives you the bottom margin, right? Right? So it's 1. Yeah, 1. Right, exactly. So you add these two together, and it gives you the bottom margin. Thank you. Woo. You can preview that. You know, and InDesign is always really good about the preview, except right now it might be like, hey, Ramon, I don't think so. There it is, right? So you could be doing it. So that's what it's starting to look like. You can click Create. So that creates the page. Now, keep in mind, right, this is just a page 1, right? You can make a master page if you want to and apply the grid on the master page if you're going to be working with the same grid over various documents. And you can make many different master pages, by the way, right? So I'll show you how to do the grid on the master page. I'm playing with the assumption that I'm going to use the same grid for all 3 posters. Okay? So keep that in mind. So one thing that I want to do is actually I'm going to make a layer, and I'm going to bring that image onto layer 1, this image of this Miller-Brockman grid, because I want to play with it and say, oh, I'm going to repeat it, right? So I'm going to bring it in. Object. I'm going to fit content, fill frame proportionally. Let's see. I always forget this one, and I'm like playing around. So fit content to frame. Let's see. There you go. You get an. Let's see. There, and you can always play with it, right? There you go, right? So that's on layer 1, right? So I can turn it on and off just to help me use a guide. You also don't need to have that if you wanted to. If you know that you want to do a 4x8 grid, you can just do a 4x8 grid. That's easy, right? So again, go back to pages. I'm going to go to the A master. If you double click that now is the A master. So whatever you put in that A master, any pages you make from that A master will be based on whatever you do here, right? So another thing, actually, go to File. If you go to Document Setup, you can control the bleed. What's the bleed? Go for it. No, what's a bleed in a document?
It's where the image goes over the white of the page, so when it prints, it doesn't cut off.
Yes, or if you want to actually make images that bleed out, you actually need to use the bleed line because you need to take the image or the type or whatever it is to that line. So when the paper gets cut, it creates the bleed out, the illusion that the image is flying out of the page, right? Traditionally, bleeds are depending. This is a printer thing, so you have to work with printers. for them to tell you what the resistance is. Usually a 1/4 inch works. Some printers require 1/2 inch bleed, which is like a lot. But so you're gonna put a bleed all around this page. There's a bleed, right? Click OK. So what you're seeing now is you see this little pink line outside on the gray part. That's the bleed. So anytime you wanted to create a bleed, you have to take that item all the way out to that line at least, or at least over that line, right? The black line is the edge of the paper, right? And the purple line, this is the margins that you've set up, right? So here we go. So back to the masters. And again, if I go to page 1 there, you see there's that grid. I can actually take that, copy it, go back to the master, go to the layers, and drop it in layer 2. Edit, paste in place if I want to use it, right? You have to make sure that a master is highlighted when you're working on it. Otherwise, you're just putting it on the page down here, right? Now, I'm going to actually, for the sake of this, turn that off, that grid, and we're just going to make the grid. So here's how you do it. So you go to Layout, you go Margins and Columns. And I hate these little windows that pop up because it's a new InDesign. Oh my God, right? So here's Margins and Columns, right? So here's the columns. So let's say that I want to do 4 columns. Always preview because I'm doing a 4x8 grid, right? 4. Oops. 4. There you go. And then the gutter. The gutter is directly related to the baseline grid. Baseline grid is directly related to leading, the space between the 2 lines of type. So it's a mathematical calculation. It's all about proportion. Keep that in mind. Also controls the gutters. The gutters, the gutters and the leading are directly related to each other. So they're a family. So keep that in mind. Okay? So let's say that you have a gutter of 0.16. You want to start thinking what the baseline is going to be for your type, right? But let's say I'm going to do a 0.18. I'm thinking divisible by 3. I have an obsession with grids, baseline grids of 3 points. FYI, that's my trick. So every baseline grid I have is 3 because in that way I can go 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. The baseline, I can start playing with it. Once you systematize that, it's ingrained in your little brain, and you're like, I can play around all this now. I don't have to worry about trying to make restart everything from scratch every time I do a new piece of work, right? So I tend to use a lot. Here's a Fibonacci sequence for typesetting. My friend Paula, right? So this is a Fibonacci sequence, point size, and then leading in 1.5 points. So you can do a baseline grid of 1.5 points or 3 points. InDesign, traditional baseline grid is 12 points. That's too much. That means you can only have a line every 12 points. That's a lot, especially if you're using small copy. Like small type, 12-point baseline is too much. So I'm always constantly playing in 3. So those of you that are math obsessed, you start to play this math game with this. It's like the only time designers were like math obsessed is like to make grids, right? Now this is my own formula because if I were to take you through the formula that all typographers use to design grids, you will go nuts. I go nuts. Because it's like, oh my God, I need to pull out the calculus calculator for this. I'm not kidding you. Last time I did it, I was like, is there like a calculator that I can pull out because I can't deal with this? If you've ever made any of the old typesetters, you'd be like, whoa, my God. Okay. I can share this Fibonacci sequence with you all, or you can generate your own. Just keep that in mind. It's something that Brinkhurst talks about, developing your own scale system to do type. Okay, so you do that there. Columns, great. So you got 4 columns. Now you go to columns and hold on. What? You're not coming. Okay. This is so funny. Why is this not? So funny, it's not letting me do this. Create guides. Come on, are you kidding me? So, all right, I'll figure this out. But notice that you see that on the number 1, there's a little A. That means it's based on the master A. If I had a master B, I could also add it, say, change it to master B. So this page is based on master A. Okay. Now, before we do that, but I'll do the baseline grid and see what happens. So the baseline grid, everybody knows what a baseline grid is? So the baseline is where the type sits, right? So you always have a baseline grid set up. So this is, pay attention, because in design, Adobe decided that they're going to put this in the most ridiculous place on the planet, and it's not called baseline grid. So you'll never find it if you do baseline grid. So you go to InDesign and you go to your preferences and go to grids, right? So InDesign, preferences, grids, right? So in this box here, there's several things that you want to look at when you're setting your file up. Standard settings, InDesign loves to leave a 1/2 inch margin at the top where it will not let you drop text into. So if you've ever worked in InDesign and you're like, why can't I drop text up there? That's because you have 1/2 inch margin that it won't allow you to do that. It's like a hang line. Now, if you have a design and you say, I want to use it, you can totally use it. I take it off. I want that control myself. I don't want InDesign to remove. It's frustrating. So you take it off. So you put 0, right? Now, baseline grid, there it is. It's called increment every. Okay? It's automatically at 12 points. That means that if you're setting body copy this small, right? If you want a baseline grid of 10 points between each line, you can't do it, right? You can do it, but you're going to have those lines that you're going to have to visually arrange. And I know seniors right now that they're like, this is how they do it. You can't design a book and do baselines visually. No. Just don't even try it. Unless you want to like, oh my God, I don't even want to know what would happen to you because you'd be like nuts. I mean, we won't hear you from you ever again. Because you'll be like, I'm doing an adjustment, hold on. Okay? So this is probably like 10 points here. So you change it. So this is the mathematical equation, right? So if I show you this Fibonacci sequence, right? This is set at 1.5, right? But I could also set it at 3, I can set it at 6, I can set it at 9, I can set it at 12. Notice that. So if you want lots of flexibility, you set it at a smaller number. Because then you can now start using smaller copy. If you've ever seen Wired magazine, Wired magazine uses like 6-point type. They have a 3-point baseline grid. This is where I got the 3-point baseline grid, by the way. I became obsessed with how they were using super tiny type that I could read. But they actually use 5-point type in Wired. It's nuts, right? You give it a lot of space. So I use 3-point baseline grid. That way I can start playing with leading. That's 3, 6, 9. Right? This starts at 1.5 leading. The way you read this is not this goes with this. This is one line. This is another line. It's just that you can't make a piece that long to keep it going. Remember, Fibonacci keeps going. It's just a number that just keeps going and going and going and going. So you could say, Ramon, I want to use 10-point type size, and then I want to try the leading 9. That's too tight. Then I want to try 12. Oh, that's nice. Or 15. That's too wide. So let me try 12. So it's 9 over 12. Does that make sense? I'll share this with you, but this is just one version of this. You can make your own. Okay? I don't uphold this all the time because sometimes I need to go into the middle. And it's usually, this is a double-stranded Fibonacci, which you'll encounter when you get to this book. And he talks about if you do a single line of Fibonacci, it's too rigid. Right? It's on page 157. The one line of Fibonacci, if you take it out, it's too rigid, but then you double-strand it, like a double-stranded helix. Mm-hmm. And then now it gives you flexibility. Right? Some people use mathematical scales for this, by the way. Music scales. If you know music, you use a scale. So a lot of designers who love music and who know how to read music will translate that scale to type, and that's how they arrange type sizes. And make all sorts of charts so that they don't have to go nuts trying to pick type sizes. Got it? It's like it will save you tons of time. But again, I'm sharing this with you in the spirit of like you developing your own system. This is not a scientific method that like everybody uses. This is not a standard. Everybody has their own little thing. Yes, question.
Is there a way to set to like change what the default baseline grid is, or do you
You can, but then
You
Adobe,
always have to go.
you always have to go and start it. Every document that you will open, you would have to do it. Like InDesign, Adobe does not love us that much
it's
let
so
us, like,
annoying.
to let us standardize it. I know this 12-point thing is ridiculous. Just remember that, okay? So I'll put this, and I'll put my friend Paula made a whole PDF of it. So there's variations of it, so you can see, and you can pick from it. But you can also make your own. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? Like you can sit there with your mouth and be like, oh, I like this. My own self loves the number, and I want to set up grids that way because it's just my own quirky way of doing things. Got it? Love it. Love it. So for the sake of this experimentation, I'm going to give you a 3-point baseline grid. Okay? Click OK. How do you see the baseline grid? You want to see it? You go to View. You go to Grids and Guides. Show the baseline grid. Now, if you're here, you're not going to see it because of the threshold on the screen. So you have to zoom in and voila, there it is. Ta-da! There it is. So you can see it. Now, I suggest you do not work with the baseline grid on unless you want to get a headache in about 5 minutes because all those little blue lines will get on your nerves so fast. Look. You're like, oh my God, Romano. See? So I don't. What you do is you force the text to sit on the baseline grid once you drop it on here. It's just too much. Got it? So you can turn that off. Grids and get Grids and Guides. High baseline grid. So it's there. Now, why is it not letting me say to create guides? So normally, because what I want to do is create the horizontal modules.
Because you did columns, like built into margins.
No, wait a minute. It shouldn't be there, right? Okay, well, at one point. So you see how I did the gutter 0.18? My baseline grid is 3. So think about that. I already created that relationship. So now I want to start to play with, oh, this gutter is 3 points. Standard is 0.16, so I could go to 0.15 or 0.18. So that the mathematics of the page and the grid itself are constant. Now, why on God's earth is this? You see that create guides right there? I should be able to highlight that. And that allows me to create the modules. Right? Let me save the file just to make sure. Sample grid. This is so weird. Am I encountering something that the new InDesign is just not interested in letting me do? Oh, let me go to the main. The active layer is hidden. Oh, okay, hold on. Let's see.
Oh, maybe that's why.
Maybe that's why. You think that's why? Magic. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. See, we don't know everything, right? So let's go to the master page. Oh my God. Create guides. Oh my God. Right? Fabulous. So here, you can create the rows and you can create the columns as well, right? I already created the columns because I know I want 4 columns. So now I want 8 rows. So I'm going to put rows 8. And what's my gutter? Who remembers what the gutter that I had was? Which one was it? No, the gutter was 18, remember? 0.18. Did you? I heard 0.20. I'm sorry, my brain heard 0.20. Okay? Now, the other thing you want to do is you want to fit the guides to the margin, not the page. Be very aware of that. Standard setting is page, but it's margin. Now, you can play with these, right? You can also remove existing ones, and it takes everything off, right? And you can start again. So there's that. Click OK. Now, look what happens. Every page, if I make a new page of this, no, I don't want to make a new, I made a new master there. So I'm going to go out here, go to page 1, and I'm just going to make a new page. Look, page 2, page 3, all have that grid. it has the same baseline grid, all of that. Now let's go to page 1 and let's see. You know how to set the type on the baseline grid? How to force it into the baseline grid? Okay, so those of you that don't know, I'm just going to put some dummy copy here, fill placeholder text for the heck of it, just to show you. Here's some dummy copy that is on really bad type, generic typeface, right?
Union Pro.
We're not using Union Pro, just be aware of that. I've retired that typeface.
Invisalign loves it so much.
I know designers love it. So one thing you want to do is you're going to pull out your paragraph, window, type, and table. Pull out your paragraph palette, right, which comes out here. So one thing you want to do is, hey, where'd you go? Oh my God. Oh, where'd you go? Part of this is I'm never used to seeing the screen this small as it shrinks it to show it to you on the screen up there. Why is it not giving me, oh my God. There it is. Ugh. Okay, so when you bring text in, it's usually, you see down here these little hamburgers all the way at the bottom of paragraph palette? The first one says to you that it is not aligned to the baseline grid. If you want to set this type on the baseline grid, you select the type and you click the second hamburger, which then bumps it. Look at the bump. You see the bump of the type? That's not lined up on the baseline grid. That's on the baseline grid. All this typography that you're creating, you can visually line it up on the baseline grid, right? So that's sort of how you set a grid. Remember that you don't leave columns of text hanging out here. That's a cheat that you sometimes have to do because the racks don't adjust right. But typically you want the text to end on the actual gutter lines. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Great. Anything else you want me to show you in InDesign really quickly?
So, what do you mean by like digitizing our typeface? Do you want us to like make it into a font that
You've already digitized it, it's there.
Oh, okay.
So
that's
you're
what-
going to have to set it manually.
Okay.
So bring the letters you need from Illustrator and drop them into InDesign and then start maneuvering them there. Yeah. Other stuff. You've digitized. If you wanted to work further, you could take these and turn them into glyphs, and you can go even more extreme. Those of you that worked with glyph last semesters know how that quirkiness can go crazy. You can do a lot, right? Other thoughts? Keep in mind that in InDesign you can do some of these edits because in InDesign you can pull out the Pathfinder tool and the pen tool, and all those are in InDesign. So even if you wanted to transfer just the letters and then refine them in InDesign, that's perfectly fine. Okay? Questions? Yes?
Now just for type sizes, so when you have the baseline locked to 2.18, how are the type sizes also
So
locked in divisions?
in threes. So that's a scale, right? So you're working with a scale. Things are not locked. Don't think about it that way, right? But if it's the gutter is 0.18 because I can work with it's a divisible of 3.
Okay, so if you were to go down, you'd have to bring the leading down to 15 and the point to 55.
Yes.
The
Now
leading does lock.
the leading locks.
It'll say like.
But what
17,
happens
but
is
it's
I'll
not.
show you exactly. It's not locked. What it does is you can actually, and I'll show it to you here with this copy, right? This is on this is on that baseline of 3. But right now, what it will do actually, I can set it to 15. InDesign likes to play around with that, but I could go ahead and say, oh, it's 18 points, so I can see what that looks like. But it won't go into 16 points because it's locked. So it's only doing increments of 3 points. And the same thing with the type size. So you can go 3, 6, 9, 12. Now, I've been known, my friend Paula will never cheat on that scale. I'm like, Paula, I need 11.5 because you know what? I have too much copy. She's like, I can't believe you cheat. I'm like, Paula, whatever. Nobody's going to know that I cheated it because I needed to get rid of that extra page that I don't have. But I'm designing 24 pages and it's 25 pages. How do you adjust that? Tweak that type size. Like there's some designers that would never allow you to do that. They're like, gotta work with the scale. 10.5 type, what is that? That's not a type sound. Play with it. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? It's an equation. You're literally playing, everything's divided by 3. You can go 1.5 if you notice there. If you want to go even smaller, you can do that. You can go to 6. Some people go 6. You can play with that scale. And then it's just, everything stays proportionate. What I tend to do is all the typography stays within that range. Everything else that I use on pages goes off. That's my trick for me. Right? Like, for example, I did a project where I had all the pictures on the grid. And I manually shifted all the pictures 1/4 of an inch on every spread in either direction. So it never felt like it was the same thing. And it was about my old boss. He's like, what the hell are you doing with these pictures? I'm like, it's the internet. He's like, oh shit. He's like, are you doing this manually? I'm like, yeah. I'm literally selecting, all the pictures are on a separate layer from the type. So I'll turn the type off and then I'll take the pictures. I put them on the grid and then I went 1/4 inch. And I discovered that by using the Pathfinder tool, by the way. Because I started experimenting with, I like to use the Pathfinder tool to take a bunch of elements and start to shift them when I get bored and I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, let me just start playing with the Pathfinder tool, the alignment tool, so that it starts moving things around. And then I'm like, oh, there it is. That's what I was trying to do. And then I lock it down. So that's a good way to start, creating shifts. All right, I'm going to stop recording here. QuickTime. Come on, QuickTime. Oh, there it is.